previous class, we had the discussion about the components of ecosystem. There we discussed about abiotic components and biotic components. After that, we also had the discussion about different types of ecosystems. What are the terrestrial ecosystems? What are the aquatic ecosystems? Even after that, we discussed about the types of terrestrial and types of aquatic ecosystems. Today, I would like to continue the next aspect of the ecosystem. That is trophic structure. Trophic refers to food. Trophic refers to food. Food structure. This means there in the ecosystem we find organisms of different types. All the organisms are not getting the food in the same general way. We find producers. We find herbivores. Even we find carnivores. Okay, these are the different kinds of organisms that we can see in the ecosystem. We all know that producers, they are the green plants. By having the chlorophyll pigment, which have the capacity to synthesize the food by the way of photosynthesis. By means of carrying out photosynthesis, yes, they produce the food. As far as herbivores are concerned, they are the animals which usually feed upon the producers or the green plants. By means of feeding upon the green plants or producers, they are going to get the food. Carnivores, they are another kind of animals. They are not getting the food like herbivores. What these carnivores does is they are going to feed upon the herbivores. By means of feeding upon the herbivores, they are getting their food. Means how exactly the food is available to the organisms present in the ecosystem. That constitutes what you call as the trophic structure. Means once the food is being produced by the green plants, how it is distributed to the herbivores, then how it is distributed to the carnivores of different types. That is going to be studied under trophic structure. And another thing that you must remember is, as far as these organisms of the different kinds are concerned, they are getting the food either by synthesizing the food through photosynthesis, or by means of feeding upon the plants, or by means of feeding upon some other animals. Okay, here what you call the food is being distributed or it is being transferred from one level organisms to another level organisms. We refer this as the trophic structure. And this trophic structure is usually constituted by the trophic levels. There are 3 to 5 trophic levels are present in every ecosystem, whether it is aquatic ecosystem or terrestrial ecosystem, be it a forest, be it a desert, be it an ocean, any kind of ecosystem for that matter, there we find the trophic levels of 3 to 5 different types. First of all, one must understand what does exactly mean by a trophic level. Trophic level means is supposed to be the group of organisms present in an ecosystem which procures their food in same general way. This is actually meant by, you look at the definition. Look at the definition. The group of organisms which procure the food in same general way. For example, I am considering green plants. Usually, green plants are present in all the ecosystems. All the green plants which obtain their food, which procure their food, in the same general way, how the green plants procure their food? They procure their food by the way of photosynthesis. Because you know that all the green plants have the light harvesting pigment called chlorophyll. With the help of chlorophyll, they can carry out the process of photosynthesis. In the process of photosynthesis, light energy is going to be used. By using the light energy, all these green plants are going to produce the food. The way of getting the food is same. Whether the green plant is small or green plant is large, they carry out the photosynthesis process and they produce their food. That's why we consider all the green plants as one trophic level. They belong to one. Suppose if you take the ecosystem, such as a grassland ecosystem, say for example, usually in the grassland ecosystem, grasses are the most usual plants. And these grasses are different species. They carry out the process of photosynthesis and get their food. They obtain the food in the same general way. That's why they are all belonging to one particular trophic. Suppose if you consider the primary consumers, Then green plants are considered as producers. That I have discussed in the previous class. So consider the primary consumers. Primary consumers, they are also regarded as herbivores. How they get their food? They get their food by means of feeding upon green plants. When they feed upon the green plants, the food present in the green plants is getting transferred to primary consumers. Whatever may be the primary consumer or the herbivore, whether it is small or large, but the way of getting the food is same. That is why we include all the primary consumers as one trophic level. Then you consider the secondary consumers. Secondary consumers are usually feeding upon the primary consumers. They feed upon the herbivores. By means of feeding upon the herbivores, they are getting their food. The way of getting the food in secondary consumers is common. Whether secondary consumer is small or it is large, but the way of getting the food is through consuming primary consumers. Okay, the way of getting the food is common. That is why all secondary consumers belongs to one trophic level. Suppose there in the ecosystem, if tertiary consumers are present, okay, and these tertiary consumers, they feed upon the secondary consumers and they get their food. That is why they are belonging to another trophic level. They are all forming another trophic level. All tertiary consumers, they feed upon the secondary consumers and get their food. That is why they are treated as one trophic level. Suppose if quaternary consumers are present, and these quaternary consumers are getting the food by means of feeding upon the tertiary consumers. That's why they form another trophic level, because the way of getting the food in quaternary consumers is common. How they get their food? They get their food by means of feeding upon tertiary consumers. Okay, here, if you consider the ecosystem, how many trophic levels are there? Minimum, we find 3 trophic levels. Maximum, we will find about 5 trophic levels. That's why I told you, yes, there are 3 to 5 trophic levels are going to be present there in ecosystems. For example, if you consider the grassland as an ecosystem, if you visit any grassland for that matter, we find grasses as the producers. All the grasses, by the way of photosynthesis, they prepare their food. Okay, that's why the food is first getting accumulated, getting incorporated there in the green plants. Green plants are the one which accumulate the food, which assimilates the food. How they assimilate the food? By the way of photosynthesis. That is why all the green plants, we consider them as the first trophic level. Always remember, first trophic level organisms are green plants, which we consider them as producers. Because for the first time there in the ecosystem, they are going to get their food by the way of photosynthesis. Then what happens is the food that is being produced by the green plants or producers is getting transferred to the next level of organisms. For example, if you consider primary consumers, then in the grassland we find primary consumers, varieties of primary consumers. Even say you may see the rabbit for that matter. Even you may see what you call as say for example grasshoppers. They are supposed to be the insects. Even you will also see what you call as snails. They usually, snails are not coming under this category. Okay, just you consider the what you call as rabbits and insects. Even for that matter, rodents. Rodents are also consuming the green plants. We also consider them as primary consumers. Okay. Then, how these primary consumers are getting their food? The way of getting the food is by means of feeding upon the plants. The way of getting the food is common. That's why we treat them as one trophic level. Okay, here all the primary consumers are considered as second trophic level because they get their food by means of consuming organisms of the first trophic level. Next, secondary consumers. These secondary consumers are considered as third trophic level organisms because they get the food by means of feeding upon primary consumers. Suppose if you consider the animals like frogs, animals like garden lizards, okay, they usually feed upon the insects, which are basically the primary consumers. By means of feeding upon the primary consumers, they get their food. That's why we treat them as organisms of one trophic level. Then consider the tertiary consumers. Here, tertiary consumers are belonging to the fourth trophic level because these organisms get their food by means of feeding upon third trophic level organisms. Maybe suppose if the animals like snakes are present, Mr. Chu. These animals like snakes, they get their food by means of feeding upon the frogs or the garden lizards. The way of getting the food is common here. That's why all the snakes, whether it is small or large, but it belongs to the fourth trophic level. Then quaternary consumers. Suppose if the animals like hawks are present, just to do. Animals like hawks are going to feed upon the snakes. They are going to feed upon the snakes, which are treated as tertiary consumers. When these hawks or eagles, they feed upon the snakes, okay, they form the organisms of the next trophic level, that is fifth trophic level. Because these fifth trophic level organisms get their food by means of feeding upon the fourth trophic level organisms. Okay, here what you see there in the ecosystem is, you can see the distribution of the food from producers to primary consumers, then to secondary consumers, then to tertiary consumers. If quaternary consumers are there, yes, the food also getting transferred to quaternary consumers. Here, distribution of the food, how exactly the food is distributed to the organisms of various trophic levels. This constitutes what you call as trophic structure. Remember, trophic structure refers to distribution of the food present in the organisms of different trophic levels in any of the ecosystems. This is with reference to that of the trophic structure and trophic levels. And remember one important thing, that here how exactly the food is getting transferred based on the order of passage of food to the organism. So we categorize them into first trophic level, second, third, fourth and fifth trophic levels. First trophic level organisms are the one, yes, they are getting the food. They are going to synthesize the food, assimilate the food by the way of photosynthesis. They are the organisms which are going to procure the food the first time there in the ecosystem. That is why we treat them as first trophic level organisms. From these organisms, yes, food is transferred next to primary consumers. That is why they are treated as secondary consumers. They are treated as second trophic level organisms. Then from second trophic level organisms, food is transferred to next trophic level organisms. We consider them as third trophic level organisms, and so on. Based on the order of passage of the food, we divide them into different trophic levels. Okay, Okay, in the next class, I am going to consider how exactly the transfer of food takes place from one trophic level organisms to another trophic level organisms, and what happens during the transfer of food from one trophic level organisms to another trophic level organisms. Okay, we shall see that in the